Chapter 43 of American History Stories, Volume 2. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. American History Stories, Volume 2, by Mara L. Pratt. Chapter 43. Poor Richard's Almanac. You should know about Poor Richard's Almanac, children, for the same reason you should know about George Washington's hatchet. 100 years ago, this was perhaps the foremost book in American literature. It was the work of our lightning hero, Benjamin Franklin. It was an almanac, not unlike the old farmer's almanac of today. In among the matter that is always to be found in almanacs, Franklin scattered all sorts of wise sayings or proverbs. To these he gave the name Poor Richard's Sayings. Many of them you have heard over and over until very likely you are tired of them. Some of them, I know from the experience of long ago, are very aggravating to children. For example, isn't it enough to make any boy wish Franklin had stuck by his printing press and his kite and let literature alone, to have Mama say, just as he is in the midst of the most exciting chapter, "Come, Johnny, it's time to go to bed. Early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise." Poor Richard's Almanac for 1734 says, in speaking of the eclipse for the year, "There will be but two, the first April 22nd, the second October 15th, both of the sun, and both, like old neighbor Scrapall's generosity, invisible." Franklin often put into his calendar weather predictions, but they were quite as likely to come out wrongly as do old Prob's predictions now. When he was criticized for the inaccuracy of his predictions, he said good-naturedly, "However, no one but will allow that we always hit the day of the month. As for the weather, I consider it will be of no service to anybody to know what weather is to be 1,000 miles off. Therefore I always set down exactly the weather my reader will have wheresoever he may be at the time. We only ask an allowance of a few days, and if there still be a mistake, set it down to the printer." The Almanac of 1738 has a scolding preface, which appears to be the work of Mistress Saunders. She says her husband had set out to visit an old star-gazer of his acquaintance on the Potomac, and left her the almanac, sealed, to send to the printer. She suspects some jests directed against her, bursts the seal, and plays havoc generally with the almanac. She says, "Looking over the months, I find he has put in abundance of foul weather this year, and therefore I have scattered here and there where I could find room, fair, pleasant, etc., for the poor women to dry their clothes in." Franklin grew to be a highly educated man, and a very gentlemanly man, too, for all he was so awkward and ungainly on his first morning in Philadelphia. Years later, when he went to England and to France in behalf of his country, his wit and his knowledge and his fine manners were the delight of the court. And this was a very fortunate thing for America, you may be sure, and for this reason, these old European countries with all their elegance and wealth and blue blood and court society had formed an idea that Americans were all awkward clodhoppers. Horny-handed tillers of the soil, they were used to calling them, and they had the idea, I suppose, that the country had not a single cultured, educated person upon its face. And so it was that when Franklin appeared before them he carried everybody by surprise, and many an Englishman and many a Frenchman, who had supposed we knew nothing in America except to dig in the earth, turned about and began to think that perhaps we were somebodies over here after all. Franklin was never dizzied by the flattering attention he received in these countries. He never forgot that he was there to plead for America, and plead he did, wisely and well, many a time rendering her a service that she could never repay. In every position of honor, in every trying time when wisdom and caution were needed, Franklin was sure to be called upon by his countrymen, and never did he fail them. When at last he died, at the age of 82, not only did 20,000 of his own countrymen come to do him honor in America, but in the English and French courts as well, was every possible tribute paid to the memory of this great man. End of chapter 43. Chapter 44 of American History Stories, Volume 2. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. American History Stories, Volume 2, by Laura L. Pratt. Chapter 44. Arnold the Traitor and Andre the Spy. One of the most daring men in the patriotic army for a time was Benedict Arnold. He was brilliant, daring, but cowardly withal, mean-spirited, jealous, and treacherous. His meaner qualities had not shown themselves very much in his military life, and as he had really been very brave and had been of great service to the country, Washington put him in command at West Point, one of the most important military posts in the whole country. But the mean-hearted Arnold had already planned to betray the post into the hands of the British, and Sir Henry Clinton, a British officer, had promised to give him 10,000 pounds in English gold for his treacherous deed. General Clinton sent a Major André to West Point to visit Arnold and make definite arrangements for the betrayal. He reached the American lines, met Arnold, and received papers from Arnold in which his whole plans were written. Putting these papers within his stockings, he started back to the British camp. He had passed the American lines and had reached Tarrytown on the Hudson. Before nightfall he would be in the camp at New York, and the plan for the surrender would be in Clinton's hands. Almost free from apprehension of danger, he rode on. Suddenly 3 men appeared in his path. Without producing his pass, he asked them, "Where do you belong?" "Down below," answered one. Down below meant New York, and André was thrown off his guard by the answer. "I belong there also," he said. "I am a British officer on important business. Do not detain me." "Then you are our prisoner," answered the men. André then produced his pass, but as by his own confession he was a British officer, it availed nothing. He offered his watch, his purse, and, more valuable than either, he offered to deliver to them next day a cargo of English dry goods if they would let him pass. They were unmoved by his bribes, and already had begun to search him. They searched pockets, saddle-bags, his hat. They even ripped open the linings of his coat. The prisoner stood nearly naked in the road, yet no paper had been found. At length they pulled off his boots. His boots were empty, but they heard the rustle of paper when they were drawn off. The stockings came last, and in his stockings under the soles of his feet were found, in Arnold's handwriting, the treasonable papers, with a plan of the fort, the way to enter it, everything, in short, that would make it easy for Clinton to get possession. André was at once taken to the nearest officer and given up to him as a prisoner. André, true to Arnold even now, asked that he might be permitted to send a line to him. As the papers had not been read, André's request was granted, and Arnold received a note which told him of André's arrest. Of course, Arnold knew that his life was now in danger, and so, hurrying from the fort, he leaped a precipice now called Traitor's Hill, and rode to the nearest boat landing. Thus he escaped to the British lines, where he put himself under the protection of Clinton. This unfortunate André was sentenced to be hanged. Clinton did all in his power to save the young man, who was by no means as black-hearted as Arnold. But it was the army law, and nothing could be done. Washington tried to capture Arnold, intending then to release André and hang him instead. The plan failed, however, and André was doomed to execution. André wrote a very manly letter to Washington, asking that he might be shot like a soldier, rather than be hanged like a dog. Washington laid this letter before André's judges, but they would not hear of any other death than hanging for the unfortunate spy. "Have you forgotten," said they, "how the British hanged our brave Nathan Hale, the noble Nathan Hale, whose last words were, 'I regret that I have but one life to give for my country'? Have you forgotten that they would not allow him to send one word to his mother, would not allow him to speak with his old minister? 'No,' said they, Andre must die as Hale did, on the gallows. Andre met death like a brave man. He hoped to the last that he might be shot and so die a soldier's death, and so when he saw the gallows awaiting him, he gave a start, shuddered, and said, "I am not afraid to die, but I hate this way of dying." Seeing that all was ready for him, he stepped into the wagon, bandaged his own eyes, fastened the rope about his neck, and said, "I pray you to hear me witness that I meet my fate like a brave man." Thus ended Major Andre's life, a tragedy which is one of the most touching of this whole war. Arnold, during the remainder of the war, fought on the English side, and at its close, since no one in America had any respect for him, he went to live in England. Even there he was held in contempt by the very ones to whom he had sold himself. So that since he was a proud man to the end, we know he must have suffered most keenly for his dastardly act. At one time, while he was living in England, a gentleman who was about to come to America on a visit asked Arnold to give him some letters of introduction to some of the leading families in America. Arnold's reply shows how bitterly he was paying for having sold his own soul. He said, "Alas, in all that great country which gave me birth, there is not one man whom I can call friend." End of chapter 44.